A Hell's Angel walks into a small southern diner and asks a quiet black waitress why she never smiles. Her answer? Because the last time I smiled, my brother died for it. The whole diner goes silent. He came looking for a meal, but what he finds is a pain deeper than his own. She serves coffee with empty eyes, and he can't stop coming back, trying to fix what's broken, even when everyone warns him to leave her alone. But just when her walls start to crack, hate comes crashing through the windows, literally, and the man everyone calls a monster might be the only one willing to stand between her and the darkness. Two lost souls. One town that doesn't forgive easily. When a biker with a past meets a woman who's forgotten how to hope, can love and faith really heal what hate destroyed? Or will their second chance at life burn before it ever begins? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The highway lay straight as a steel rule under a hard Alabama sun. Heat rose in ripples. The air tasted like metal and dust. A lone bike thundered across the flat, a black shape against pale sky. The rider leaned with the wind, broad shoulders under a faded leather vest. Scar lines crossed his knuckles where the gloves didn't cover. His face kept its own weather, part storm, part winter. He rode as if the road was the only thing that still made sense. He went by Clint Razor Maddox to folks who cared to ask, though most didn't. The nickname clung to him like old smoke. He didn't correct it. Some names you inherited from trouble, and some you kept so trouble knew where to find you. The Harley's engine beat steady, but the gas gauge no longer smiled. He watched the needle drift down and felt the dread that came from miles with no sign, no town, no break in the heat. Off to the right, a stand of longleaf pines made a dark comb against sky. The rest was fields and wire fence and a faded billboard for peaches, the kind that looked better in paint than in hand. He saw it then, a low building at the bend, white paint peeling in strips. A neon sign buzzed in the light. Betty's Place. An old Coke sign hung crooked by the door like a tired grin. Two pickup trucks sat in the lot, both with chalky dust on their tires. A hand-lettered board read Catfish Fry, Fry Night. The open sign glowed, and beside it, a paper star taped to the glass said, God bless our vets. Clint coasted in and cut the engine. Silence jumped up quick and loud when the motor died. He took off his helmet and set it on the seat. Sweat beaded at his temple and crawled down his neck. He wiped it with the back of his hand and looked at himself in the diner window. The glass gave him a dim reflection. Gray at the temples, lines around the mouth, a nose broken more than once. He didn't smile at the man who looked back. He went inside. The bell over the door made a sound like a spoon hitting a jar. Grease and coffee and something sweet, peach maybe, hung in the air. A ceiling fan turned slow. The booths wore cracked red vinyl patched with tape. A fly tapped the window near a dead jukebox in the corner. A hand-painted cross stood on the counter like a quiet sign that this place had its own rules. She stood behind the counter with a pad in one hand. Ruth Ann Carter wore a plain blue apron and a white shirt that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back neat, and her eyes were steady and tired. Not cold, just far away. She moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned how to make herself smaller in a world that didn't always want to see her. She looked at him the way a field looks at a storm, ready to bend if it must, but flat, not inviting. Seat yourself, she said, voice even, soft around the edges. He took a stool at the counter. The cushion hissed under him. He took in the room while she poured water into a jelly jar glass. Two men played checkers near the back. A woman in a teal dress rifled through her purse with both hands, like she had lost not just a quarter, but the thread of her day. From the kitchen came the clatter of a pan and a woman's hum. The tune caught for a moment, and then went quiet, as if the singer had swallowed the rest of her own thought. "What can I get you?" Ruth Ann asked. "Coffee," he said, "and whatever's hot and won't fight back." A corner of her mouth thought about moving and decided against it. She poured coffee into a thick white mug with a brown ring stained near the lip. "Meatloaf's good," she said. "Mashed. Collards." "Works," he said, and wrapped his hands around the mug as if heat could travel into bone. He waited for her to ask where he was from, what brought him. She didn't. He watched her write the ticket and clip it onto a line that ran into the kitchen. Her hands were quick and sure. He knew quick hands. Quick hands could save a life or start a fight. He had used his for both. "Passing through?" she asked, not looking up. "That obvious?" "Folks who live here don't look so surprised by the dust." He let a short breath out that might have been a laugh. "Been a while since I saw this much of it." She gave a polite nod and moved down the counter to fill salt shakers, top off napkin holders, check the pie case. He watched the way she kept everything neat as a hymn line. Not a spill, not a smear. It made him think of clean ledger books and debts measured in ink. A plate slid up from the kitchen. The cook, a stout woman with a red scarf over her hair, peered at him with sharp eyes and said nothing. Ruth Ann brought the food to him. The meatloaf sat thick and brown with a glaze that caught the light. The mashed potatoes had a crater of butter, and the collards shone with a hint of vinegar. He took a bite and felt the simple joy of salt and warm and something like home that he couldn't name. He ate slow, letting time stretch. The two men at the back slapped checker pieces and muttered. The woman in teal found her quarter and smiled at herself. A small private thing. The bell on the door chimed for a man in work boots who took a seat without asking. All of it felt like a little town keeping itself together with fried food and routine. He glanced at the jukebox. Dust sat thick on its chrome, like it had given up waiting. Old paper labels peeked through the glass. Names bubbled up from a life he remembered. Hank, Aretha. A gospel song he didn't want to name because naming it would pull something up he wasn't ready to hold. "You don't run that?" he asked, chin lifting towards the machine. "Broke," she said. "Been broke." He nodded and sipped coffee. The coffee was strong, bitter in a clean way, and it woke a space behind his eyes he had let sleep too long. When the plate was clean and the mug half gone, he caught her attention with 2 fingers. "You serve smiles with pie?" he asked. He meant it light. He meant it like a man tossing a pebble to see how deep the well might be. Her face did not change. She looked at him, not unkind. Her eyes were dark and clear like river water after rain. "Not anymore," she said. He felt the words more than heard them. They landed under his ribs and stayed. "That's so," he said, and tried to keep his tone easy, as if she had said they were out of cherries. He paid his bill with a 20 and took out another bill, folded neat, and laid it under the edge of his plate. He slid it toward her like a man offering a bridge. She saw the extra money at once. Her fingers touched the corner and pushed it back toward him. "You paid your meal," she said. "We're square." "It's for the coffee," he said. "You paid the coffee." "Then it's for the pie I didn't have. We don't take gifts for what folks didn't eat." The line should have made a smile on him. It didn't. He tried again, slower. "It's just a thank you." She held his gaze a beat longer than before. Something like weariness moved in her. Not anger, not pride. just a tired rule that had saved her from too many strings. "Thank you for saying thank you," she said. "You keep it." He folded the bill back into his wallet without a show. He had been turned away in harder ways. He tugged at his gloves and stood. "Food's good," he said. "Compliments to the cook." The woman with the red scarf leaned into the window from the kitchen and lifted her chin. "Uh-huh," she said, in a way that meant she knew good from flattery and would allow this as the first for now. Outside, the heat had shifted. A low bank of clouds had built in the west while he ate. Thunder rolled far off, like somebody moving furniture upstairs. He strapped the helmet to his bike and looked back once through the diner window. She wiped the counter with slow circles, a learned motion that made the surface shine. Her mouth was set, not cruel, not bitter, just not invited to joy. He felt a small, unexpected ache. A quiet thought rose, unasked. What took her smile? He shoved the thought down. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know this town. But the ache stayed, the kind that did not ask permission to live in a man's chest. He rode to the little motor court out by the feed store, where the sign said vacancy, and the office smelled like mothballs. The manager slid a key across the counter, an old brass thing that made a nice weight in the hand. Room 6. He wheeled the bike to the door, listened to the small tick of the engine cooling, and went inside. The room held a bedspread with flowers faded to ghost colors, a lamp with a crooked shade, and a Bible in the drawer. The air unit panted. He set his bag on the chair, took off his boots, and looked at his hands. Grease still slept under the nails in fine gray moons. He scrubbed them in the small sink till the water ran clear and cold. The mirror showed a stranger who looked like someone folks crossed streets to avoid. He lay down and stared at the ceiling, where a brown water stain spread like a map of a country no one wanted to visit. Thunder moved closer. Rain came at last, soft at first, then hard, drumming the roof. The sound filled the room with a rhythm that matched something in him. He closed his eyes and saw the diner again. The cross on the counter, the dead jukebox, the woman who wouldn't take a tip and wouldn't offer a smile. He turned on his side and reached for the nightstand drawer. His fingers found the Bible. It was the same kind he had held in places that smelled like bleach and iron bars. He opened it at random and read words without letting them mean anything. After a time, the words did what they always did when he was honest. They went past his head and into the ache. He closed the book and put his hand flat on the cover as if it might steady him. "God," he said into the room, voice low and rough. "Dunno what you want with me. Haven't known for a long time, but thank you for the food. And for—" He stopped, as if he had stepped onto a board that might break. "For that place, for that lady working too hard." He did not say her name. He did not know it yet. He pictured her hands anyway, thin, strong, steady. He pictured the way her eyes had held, then slid away the moment she had finished her job, as if to keep herself from soft places. He felt the old shame rise, because he had seen that look before in men who learned early not to want anything too much. The rain eased. Cars hissed past on the highway like tired snakes. He drifted and woke and drifted again, the kind of sleep that never quite closed the door. Sometime before dawn, he sat up and flipped on the bedside lamp. His chest felt tight with a plan that wasn't a plan. He had nowhere to be. He could ride south or north. He could push on. He could leave that diner behind like every other place where he had once sat and felt almost human. He put water in the small coffee maker and watched it spit and steam. The smell was sharp and thin. He drank half a cup and poured the rest down the sink. He washed his face and shaved, just enough to take the edge off the stubble. The razor scraped across the old scars and did not complain. By the time light showed at the bottom of the curtain, the rain had gone. The world smelled rinsed, green and clean, like a field after good news. He pulled on his boots and went outside. The air felt lighter. Dew hung on the bike's gas tank in a line of beads. He wiped it with a rag and swung a leg over the seat. He could go anywhere. He could go nowhere. He turned the key and let the engine rumble alive, a living thing under him. He tested the throttle, listened to the sound fill the quiet street, and smiled a little to himself for no reason he would admit. At the end of the motor court drive, he paused. The highway ran left and right. He should have turned right, toward the next town with a tire shop that might hire a man under the table for a day's work. He turned left. The diner would be opening soon. Coffee would be fresh. A woman with steady hands would be lining up salt shakers again, making surfaces shine. He told himself he needed breakfast. He told himself he wanted to ask about that jukebox, see if he could get it to hum. He told himself a lot of simple things, and let the engine carry him. He reached Betty's place just as the neon flickered awake for the day. The lot was empty except for a single tan sedan. The bell over the door gave its small jar clink as he went in. The room smelled like new coffee and bleach, like a promise to try again. She stood at the counter with a key ring, opening the till. A stack of fresh napkins sat beside her hand. Her hair was different this morning, a loose strand escaping to her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear with quick fingers. Her gaze lifted and found him. The surprise in it was brief, then gone, as if she folded the feeling and set it aside the way she would fold a towel. "Back already," she said. "Guess I forgot my appetite here," he said. Her mouth made the smallest curve. It wasn't a smile, not yet, but it wasn't nothing. "Coffee," she said, and reached for a mug. He took the same stool as yesterday. The cushion hissed hello. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup she set down. Morning laid a pale stripe across the counter through the window. In the corner, the jukebox waited like a sleeping dog. He cleared his throat and tried to sound casual. "That box," he said. "You mind if I take a look at it, if you're not busy?" Her eyes flicked to the machine and back. "It's been dead for a long time." "Sometimes dead things surprise you," he said. "Sometimes they only need a wire and a little hope." She looked at him as if at a puzzle that might be worth the time. "You know how?" she asked. "I know enough to break it." "Worse," he said, and that almost earned a laugh. "We open in 10, she said. "If you can do it without making a mess." "I can do a lot without making a mess," he said, and surprised himself with the truth of it. She slid a small tool kit from under the counter. It was old and neat, and held what a person kept around for stubborn screws and bad days. She placed it on the counter between them. He took it, aware of the trust measured in inches and metal. He stood, took his coffee with him, and walked to the jukebox with a mechanic's careful joy. Behind him, she watched with arms folded, more curious than wary now. Outside, the sun climbed slow. The world woke. The day began. And whatever had started yesterday, small as a spark, quiet as rain on a motel roof, leaned forward toward its own name. The morning light slid soft through the diner windows, painting the booths in gold stripes. Coffee steamed in fresh pots, and bacon sizzled somewhere out back. The air smelled of toast and cinnamon, a smell that told regulars their day was starting just fine. Clint Maddox sat at the counter again. His leather jacket hung on the stool beside him, and his hair was still damp from washing at the motel sink. He looked cleaner than yesterday, but his eyes still carried that tired shadow that didn't wash off easy. Ruth Ann Carter stood behind the counter, her apron already dusted with flour from rolling biscuits. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You again?" she said softly, with a tone halfway between suspicion and curiosity. "Guess I got nowhere better to be," he said, wrapping his hands around a steaming mug. "Coffee's good, company's quiet, beats the road. Quiet's what keeps the peace around here." He nodded and watched her pour another cup for a farmer down the counter. She didn't waste movements. Every step, every reach looked practiced, like she'd been doing this dance for years. After the farmer left, silence stretched between them again. Clint tapped his mug, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound like a mistake. "You work every day?" he asked finally. "Every day the good Lord wakes me up." He smiled faintly. "Seems like he wakes you up early." "That's the only time this town's still." He hesitated. "You ever get tired of the same faces, same folks, same everything?" She didn't answer right away. She wiped the counter with a clean rag, folding the cloth as if to give herself a second to think. "Routine's safe," she said. "Safe keeps you breathing." Her tone was quiet but heavy, the kind that made a man wonder what she wasn't saying. Clint leaned forward, elbows on the counter. "You ever smile when it's safe?" he asked, teasing but gentle. That stopped her. She froze mid-motion, cloth still in her hand. Her head lifted and she looked at him. Really looked. For a heartbeat, her eyes glimmered with something old and hurting. Then she said, softly, evenly, "Because the last time I smiled, my brother died for it." The air seemed to drain out of the diner. Somewhere, a clock ticked. A fork clinked on a plate in the back room, and even that sound felt loud. Clint blinked. He stopped. Words didn't fit that kind of truth. She turned away, as if the conversation had ended before it began. Her voice steadied again, polite and distant. "You need anything else?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am." She nodded once and walked into the kitchen, the swing door closing behind her. Clint stared at the counter for a long minute, watching sunlight creep across the napkin dispenser. His chest felt tight. He'd asked plenty of wrong questions in his life, but none that felt like this. None that opened a wound just by asking. After a while, the cook, Mrs. Lula May, came out carrying a tray of cornbread. She set it down and gave Clint a look sharp enough to shave bark off a tree. "You that biker that's been sniffing around here?" she asked. "Just ordering breakfast," Clint said, trying to sound light. "Then stick to that," she said, wagging a finger. "That girl's had more loss than one heart should hold. You hear me? Don't go digging where you got no business." He nodded once. Wasn't trying to dig. She said, unconvinced. Then, softer. "She don't talk much, 'cause every word costs her something. You'll know that if you got half the sense you look like you lost." Lula May went back into the kitchen, leaving Clint with his thoughts. He finished his coffee in silence and paid his bill, laying the money carefully under the saucer. He didn't bother leaving a tip this time. He'd learned his lesson. Outside, the day had grown thick with heat. The sun pressed down like it wanted to flatten everything beneath it. He swung his leg over the bike and sat there for a while before starting the engine. His heart beat hard against his ribs. That line, "My brother died for it," wouldn't leave him alone. It looped through his head like a song he didn't want to hum. He thought about the years he'd spent running with his biker crew, about the fights, the raids, the hate that lived in men who called each other brother. He thought about his own brother, Jack, who died in a fire started by one of those same gangs. He'd never known peace since. He started the bike and rolled toward the motel, but halfway there, he pulled over. There was a little white church up on a hill, steeple bent just a bit, cross pointing into a blue too bright for the pain that sat in his chest. He cut the engine and sat there, helmet in his lap. He hadn't prayed in a church since the day of Jack's funeral. But right now, he wished someone else was steering his life. "God," he muttered, voice cracking. "What am I doing here? You dragged me off that highway for what? To break some waitress's heart open again?" A breeze swept through the trees, hot and dry. It felt like no answer at all, and yet somehow it didn't feel like silence either. He rode back into town when the sun began to fall. The diner lights were still on, the neon buzzing like tired bees. He thought about stopping, then shook his head and kept going. He didn't want to make things worse. But when he reached the corner, he saw a couple of teens spray painting a wall behind the diner. Messy white letters spelling something ugly. His gut clenched. He knew that kind of hate too well. He revved the bike and pulled up beside them. "Hey!" he barked. The boys froze. One dropped the can. They looked at his leather vest and the scars and took off running into the dark. Clint stood there staring at the half-finished slur, his fists tight. His breath came heavy, almost trembling. He wanted to chase them, but he knew it wouldn't fix anything. It never had. He grabbed an old rag from his saddlebag and started wiping at the paint, but it smeared into gray streaks. Then the door opened behind him. Ruth Ann stepped out, holding a trash bag. She stopped when she saw him. Her eyes flicked from his hands to the wall. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice sharp. "Cleaning," he said, straightening up. "You expect me to believe that?" "Believe what you want. I just saw what they wrote and couldn't leave it." Her jaw tightened. "You ride with them?" "No," he said firmly. "I left that life." But his words fell flat against the years tattooed on his arms. She looked at the paint again, then at him, then turned without another word and went inside. The sheriff arrived 15 minutes later, siren off but lights flashing red against the wall. He asked a few questions. Clint told him what he saw. The sheriff didn't look convinced, but didn't arrest him either. When the patrol car pulled away, Clint sat on the curb and stared at the wall. The letters still bled faintly under the streetlight. He knew how fast a man's past could follow him. He stayed there until the last car left the highway, and the night turned quiet. The smell of fried food still drifted faint from the diner. He thought about her voice again. Low, strong, trembling just once when she said her brother had died for her smile. He took a long breath and stood. The world didn't feel any cleaner, but something inside him had shifted. Maybe this time, he wouldn't run from it. Back at the motel, he cleaned his hands, poured himself weak instant coffee, and sat by the window. Lightning flickered in the distance. He whispered to the dark, "You don't smile 'cause you lost him. I don't smile 'cause I lost me. Maybe we both need a reason." And outside, thunder rolled again, as if the world had heard him and was thinking it over. Morning came with sunlight, warm as syrup across the road. The storm from the night before had washed the dust clean off the trees and left puddles shining in the potholes. Clint rolled up to the diner with his sleeves pushed up and a quiet kind of hope humming under his ribs. He told himself it was about the coffee, maybe the biscuits, but deep down, he knew better. The bell over the door clinked when he walked in. Ruth Ann looked up from refilling the sugar jars. Her eyes flickered, surprise maybe, but no smile. "You don't quit easy, do you?" she said. "Not when the food's this good," he said, sliding onto his usual stool. She poured his coffee without asking. "You know we're open for everyone, right? You don't have to make this your headquarters." He chuckled. "Can't help it. Feels peaceful here." "Peaceful?" she said, one brow lifting. "You must not have been here last night." He looked down into his mug. "Yeah, I saw it." Something flickered across her face. Shame, anger, something he couldn't name. "You were there?" "I was," he said. Saw 2 kids spray painting. Chased them off before they finished. She froze, towel still in her hand. You didn't... Wasn't me, he said softly. Never was? Silence stretched a moment, then she nodded once and looked away. I believe you. He didn't expect that. The words landed deep. He cleared his throat, wanting to change the air between them. You said that jukebox was dead? Been dead a long time, she said. He grinned a little. Mind if I take a look? Can't stand to see good music go to waste. She hesitated. You fix things? I try. Machines, bikes, hearts if they sit still long enough. That earned him half a glance. She sighed and nodded toward the corner. Fine. But if it breaks worse, you're paying for it. He stood and walked over. The jukebox was an old Wurlitzer, chrome faded dull, letters on the song cards yellowed with time. He ran a calloused hand along the side and felt the dust. Used to have one of these at a bar in Amarillo, he said. Ran on hope and nickels. You sure you know what you're doing? She called. Nope, he said, and started anyway. He pulled off the back panel and found a nest of wires, frayed but still alive. He fiddled gently, testing connections, tightening screws. The smell of old metal and oil rose in the air. Ruth Ann came closer without meaning to, drawn by the quiet patience in his movements. She noticed how careful his hands were. Strong, steady, not rough like most men's. For a moment she forgot the tattoos and the scars. He found the main cord pinched near the base, stripped wire showing through. There's your culprit, he muttered. Just needs a touch. She crossed her arms. Touch of what? He smiled faintly. Faith. He twisted the wire together, wrapped it with black tape from his pocket, then plugged the jukebox back in. Nothing happened. He frowned, tapped the side once. Come on, girl, don't give up on me yet. A click sounded deep inside. Then a low hum. The old lights flickered weakly, then bloomed into a faint blue glow. Ruth Ann's lips parted. Well, I'll be... Clint dropped a coin in, pressed a button with a guess. The record arm moved. A scratchy crackle came through the speakers, and then the soft, trembling notes of His Eye is on the Sparrow. Ruth Ann's breath caught. She gripped the counter edge, eyes wide. That's, she whispered, but couldn't finish. Her brother's song. Clint watched her face change as the music filled the diner, soft at first, then rising like a prayer too strong to stay quiet. She turned away, one hand pressed to her mouth. Tears welled, glistening in the corners of her eyes. Clint stood still, feeling something holy settle over the room. The cook peeked out from the kitchen but said nothing. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. When the song ended, Ruth Ann took a shaky breath and wiped her cheeks. That was his favorite, she said quietly. We played it at his service. Clint nodded. I didn't know, I just picked. She looked at him, eyes still wet but softer now. Maybe you were meant to. He ducked his head, a bit embarrassed by the weight of her gaze. Just wanted to hear some music with my breakfast. You got more than that, she said. You got the whole diner crying. That made him smile. You too. She gave a small, trembling laugh, the first real one he'd heard from her. Guess so. The moment felt fragile and precious, like a soap bubble that could pop with one wrong word. So he didn't speak again. He just let the quiet sit with her. Later, when he got ready to leave, he folded a small piece of paper from his pocket and placed it under his empty mug. She noticed it only after he walked out. It was a scrap torn from an old receipt. In rough handwriting it said, "You're still alive for a reason." She stared at it for a long time. Her thumb brushed the words like they were something alive. Outside, Clint started his bike and looked once through the diner window. She stood there in the sunlight, the paper in her hand. For a second, it looked like she might smile again. He turned the key and rode off slow, the music from the jukebox still echoing in his head. That night, Ruth Ann stayed after closing. She wiped the counter, mopped the floor, and set the chairs up. The diner was empty and still. She walked to the jukebox and placed her palm against it. It hummed faintly, as if breathing. She looked at the note again, then at the ceiling. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe you ain't done with me yet." And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a small, honest smile. By Friday night, Betty's place smelled of fried catfish and hope. The jukebox hummed steady, the lights soft and amber, and for once, Ruth Ann Carter caught herself humming along while she worked. Folks laughed over plates of hush puppies and sweet tea. Even Mrs. Lula May cracked a grin now and then, shaking her, head at the line that reached the door. Clint had become part of the rhythm that week. He'd fixed a wobbly stool, patched a leaky pipe, and taken his meals at the counter without fuss. People had begun to nod at him instead of stare. It wasn't quite friendship, but it was something. As he refilled the sugar shakers for Ruth Ann, he said, "Town's starting to thaw out." She glanced at him, that faint, near smile she'd practiced all week flickering at her lips. "Don't get used to it. Folks here forgive slow and forget slower." "Fair enough," he said. "Guess that's why I fit in." That earned him a quiet laugh. Low, warm, quick. It caught him off guard how good that sound felt. When the night rush ended, Clint helped stack chairs and sweep crumbs. Ruth Ann didn't stop him. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of rain on asphalt. The horizon flashed with faraway lightning. "You'd better get home," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Storm's comin'." "I'll head out when it breaks," he said, leaning against the counter. "You lock up." She hesitated, then nodded. "Suit yourself. Just don't get yourself struck." He grinned. Wouldn't be the first time lightning tried. She rolled her eyes, grabbed her bag, and turned the key in the door behind her. As she walked to her car, the first fat drops began to fall. By the time Clint finished his coffee, thunder had rolled close. He flicked off the lights, leaving the jukebox's faint blue glow to fill the room. He stepped outside to watch the storm hit full force. Rain poured sideways. He pulled his jacket tighter and started toward his bike. Then he heard it, glass breaking. The sound came from the side of the building. He turned fast, heart thudding. Another crash followed, then the splatter of paint. When he rounded the corner, he saw 3 shadows, figures in hooded jackets, spray cans hissing under the floodlight. The words they painted were crude, cruel, familiar, words that burned through years of memories he wished he could erase. "Hey!" Clint barked, running toward them. One of the vandals turned. "Mind your business, old man." "Not this time," Clint growled. They bolted for a pickup idling at the curb. Clint lunged, catching one by the jacket, but the kid was slick and slipped free. The truck fishtailed as it roared off, mud flying in its wake. Clint stood there panting in the rain, fists tight, staring at the slur half-finished on the wall. The paint dripped like blood. He grabbed a rag from his bike's saddlebag and began wiping at it, but the color just smeared into gray streaks. The rain mixed it all together into something ugly and wet. A voice came from behind him. Sharp, accusing. "What do you think you're doing?" He turned. Ruth Ann stood under her umbrella, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide. She must have turned back for her phone charger. He began, but she cut him off. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "You come here, act friendly, fix my jukebox, and then this?" Her voice cracked at the end. The hurt in it hit harder than the rain. "No," he said quickly. "It wasn't me. I heard glass break. I tried to stop them. They ran before I—" "Stop lying," she said. "I know what those colors mean. I know your kind of crowd." He stepped closer, rain running down his face. "You don't know me, ma'am. You don't know a damn thing about me." "I know you're a man with a record," she shot back. "That's all this town needs to know." Something in him snapped. Not anger, but the kind of pain that had nowhere to go. "You're right," he said, voice low. "I've done things I wish I could scrub off like that wall, but this ain't one of them." The sheriff's cruiser pulled up just then, lights flashing red and blue through the rain. Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped out, boots splashing. "What's going on here?" "Someone vandalized the diner," Ruth Ann said. "He's standing right here with paint all over his hands." Bradley's eyes flicked from her to Clint. "That true?" Clint held up the rag, soaked and gray. "I was cleaning it off." "Sure you were," the sheriff said, pulling a small flashlight. He swept it over the wall, over Clint's vest, over the ink on his arms. "You run with the Devil's Sons, didn't you?" "Used to," Clint said evenly. "Not anymore." "Still looks bad?" "Yeah," Clint muttered. "Story of my life." Bradley sighed. "All right, I ain't arresting you, but you best not leave town till I get statements. You hear?" Clint nodded once, jaw tight. When the sheriff left, Ruth Ann stood there in the rain, shaking, her umbrella forgotten at her side. The anger was gone now. Only confusion remained. "I don't know what to believe," she whispered. "Then believe what you saw," he said quietly. "A man trying to help, maybe too late." She looked at him, her lips trembling. "Why would you even care?" He hesitated. "'Cause I've been where hate lives," he said, "and I know what it costs." She stared at him for a long time, then turned and walked to her car without another word. The rain fell harder. Clint watched her taillights vanish down the road. The diner lights flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. He stood there alone, soaked through, the slur half erased beside him. His chest ached like it used to after long fights he didn't win. By the time he got back to the motel, his boots left wet prints on the carpet. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small Bible again. He opened it without thinking, and his eyes fell on a verse he half remembered from some prison chapel years ago. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." He closed his eyes and said softly, "Then shine, Lord. Just shine." Somewhere thunder rolled one last time, far away now. And in that same hour, Ruth Ann sat at her kitchen table, the note he'd written still folded in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, read it again. "You're still alive for a reason." Her breath caught. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the villain her heart had built him into. But she wasn't ready to find out. Not yet. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, like the sky didn't want to open its eyes. The diner sat quiet under that low cloud, the smell of wet asphalt still hanging from last night's storm. Ruth Ann stood inside early, unlocking cupboards, setting out napkins, trying to pretend the walls didn't carry the ghost of hateful words. She'd scrubbed them till her hands were raw, but a faint gray stain still clung to the bricks outside. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Clint's face in the rain. Tired, drenched, and hurt in a way that had nothing to do with weather. She told herself she didn't care, that he was just another stranger with a story and a past. But deep down, something about his eyes kept tugging at her conscience, like a song half remembered. When the bell above the door chimed, she almost jumped. Clint stepped in, water still dripping from his jacket. His knuckles were scraped raw, and his hair clung damp to his forehead. He looked like he'd fought the night and barely made it out. "Morning," he said softly. She hesitated. "You shouldn't be here." "Then fire me," he said, easing onto his usual stool. "Except you never hired me." Her jaw tightened. "I don't want trouble." "Neither do I." He rubbed the back of his neck. "But I heard you might need a roof patched. Couple boards loose from that storm." She frowned. "And you just thought you'd do it?" "Thought I'd offer." She studied him for a long moment. His eyes weren't angry. They were just tired. Tired the way hers were. And maybe, she thought, two tired souls didn't have the strength left to fight. After a long silence, she sighed. "Fine. If you're gonna help, might as well do it right. There's a ladder out back. Watch your step. It's slick." He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She watched him through the window as he climbed the ladder. His movements were careful, practiced. He moved like a man who'd spent his life fixing what others broke. When Lula May arrived a half hour later, she squinted up at him. "You let that man up there?" Ruth Ann poured coffee without meeting her eyes. "He's patching the roof." Lula May made a sound halfway between a grunt and a prayer. "Honey, that man's trouble." "Maybe," Ruth Ann said softly. "But he's also the only one who showed up." The morning wore on. The rain stayed away, but the air stayed thick. When Clint came down, covered in dust and sweat, he leaned against the doorframe with a half smile. "Shouldn't leak anymore," he said. Ruth Ann handed him a cup of sweet tea. "Thank you." He took it with both hands, like it was something sacred. "Didn't do much." "You did enough." They stood there in quiet, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the space between them. After a minute, she said, "I heard from Sheriff Bradley this morning. They caught one of the boys who did it." His head lifted. "Yeah?" She nodded. 17. Said they saw an old biker and wanted to stir things up. Clint let out a breath. "Guess I still draw the wrong kind of crowd." "Guess you still tried to stop it," she said softly. That surprised him. Her tone wasn't cold anymore. It held something like gratitude, cautious and small but real. He nodded once, eyes dropping to his cup. "I know what it's like to be blamed for things I didn't do," he said. "Didn't figure I'd ever see the day someone believed me." She didn't say anything, but her eyes softened. As noon came, business picked up again. Farmers, delivery drivers, a young mother with 2 kids, they all filled the booths. Clint fixed a flickering light above the register, earning a few curious glances but no complaints. By the time the crowd thinned, Ruth Ann brought him a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. "On the house," she said. He looked up. "I thought you don't take gifts." Her lips curved faintly. "Consider it a trade. You fixed my roof." He grinned. "Fair deal." For the first time, she sat down across from him, just for a minute. He asked, "You been working here long?" 8 years, she said, "since Mama passed. The owner, Betty, gave me a chance when nobody else would." "She's still around?" "She's retired. Checks in sometimes. Calls to fuss if we're low on napkins." He smiled. "Sounds like a good boss." "She's kind," Ruth Ann said. "Always told me, the Lord don't waste pain, baby. He turns it into purpose if you let him." She stirred her tea absently. "Never believed that much until lately." "What changed?" he asked. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe it's that jukebox. Maybe it's the way the song came back right when I needed it." He smiled faintly. "I just got lucky." "Maybe it wasn't luck," she said, her voice low. "Maybe it was mercy." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They worked side by side the rest of the afternoon. She cooking, he fixing what needed fixing. The rhythm felt easy, almost natural. By closing time, the storm stains were gone from the walls, and laughter from the lunch crowd still lingered in the air. As the sun dipped low, Ruth Ann leaned against the counter. "You know, for a man who claims he's done with trouble, you sure find a lot of it." He chuckled. "Guess trouble's the only thing that still recognizes me." Her eyes caught his. "Maybe it's time something else did." He didn't answer, but something in him cracked open a little, like a rusted hinge finally giving way. That night, after the diner lights went dark, Clint sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee. Ruth Ann joined him, arms crossed, watching the horizon fade to purple. "You said you used to run with bikers," she said quietly. "What made you stop?" He took a long breath. "My brother, Jack. He was all I had. Got killed in a fight we didn't start. After that, I couldn't keep calling hate a brotherhood." Her voice softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Guess I've been trying to make peace with ghosts ever since." They sat in silence a while longer, the cicadas singing, the air sweet with honeysuckle. Finally, Ruth Ann said, "Ghosts don't scare me anymore. Loneliness does." He looked over at her, the porch light catching the sadness in her eyes. "You ain't alone," he said quietly. "Not anymore." She didn't look at him, but a small smile flickered and stayed this time. Gentle, real. Inside, the jukebox clicked on all by itself. The first notes of "His Eye is on the Sparrow" floated through the window, soft as a prayer. Neither of them moved. They just listened. Two worn souls sitting on a quiet porch, letting grace find its way between them. Sunday morning dawned cool and pale, the kind of day that felt like a breath after too much heaviness. The church bell in Magnolia rang through the air, slow and steady, echoing across fields that glowed gold in the sun. Clint sat outside the diner on the back steps, sipping coffee from a paper cup, staring at the road that ran east toward nowhere. He'd been thinking about Ruth Ann since dawn, about the way her voice softened last night, about that smile she hadn't hidden this time. There was something in her that stirred a feeling he hadn't trusted in years. Peace. The screen door creaked open. Ruth Ann stepped out, her apron tied loosely, a scarf around her hair. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Roof bothering you again?" He grinned faintly. "Nah, just my mind." She handed him a biscuit wrapped in a napkin. "Here, fresh." He took it. "Thank you." They sat there for a moment, side by side, watching cars roll past on the highway. After a while, she said, "Pastor Ellis asked me to tell you you're welcome at church any time. Said we could use a man who fixes things." Clint looked up, half smiling. "Church, huh? Last time I went, I left in handcuffs." Her lips curved gently. "Might be a better ending this time." He chuckled under his breath. "Not sure the Lord takes walk-ins." "He takes everybody," she said simply. Her words hung there between them like sunlight through dust. He looked away, embarrassed by the way they warmed him. "You go every week?" She nodded. "Used to sing in the choir before Isaiah." Her voice caught. She swallowed hard and started again. "Before my brother died." Clint said nothing. He just waited. She glanced at him, maybe surprised he didn't fill the silence with useless words. "He was 27, served overseas, kindest soul you ever met. Always said I worried too much." He shifted, watching her eyes grow far away. "The day he came home," she said softly, "he wore his uniform. I remember smiling so big at him on the porch. Told him he looked like a movie hero. He laughed, said, "Sis, don't make me blush." She blinked hard. 2 hours later, he went to the store, never came back. Clint's chest tightened. What happened? Traffic stop. Cop thought he looked suspicious, reached for his wallet, got shot before he could say his name. Her voice trembled but stayed steady. They said it was a mistake, but that didn't change the empty chair at Sunday dinner. Clint stared at his hands. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know sorry don't fix anything, but I am." Ruth Ann nodded. "It's not about fixing. It's about remembering without breaking every time." He turned his coffee cup slowly. "You think that's possible?" She smiled sadly. "Some days, I think maybe." The church bell rang again, closer now. Clint looked up to see people walking down the road toward the small white building across the field. Pastor Ellis stood by the door, shaking hands, smiling wide. Ruth Ann nudged him. "You could come?" He hesitated. "I don't fit in there." "You fit here," she said quietly. "And that's a start." He looked down the road again, at the church steeple cutting into the blue sky. "Guess it couldn't hurt," he said finally. They walked together down the dusty road. Kids ran ahead in pressed shirts and bright dresses. Women carried covered dishes for the potluck. It all looked like a life Clint had watched from the outside his whole life. When they reached the door, Pastor Ellis smiled. "Well, I'll be," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome, friend." Clint hesitated before shaking it. "Not sure I'm the church kind." "Good," the pastor said with a grin. "Neither was I when God found me." The service began. Ruth Ann sang softly beside him, her voice trembling but true. When the congregation reached "Amazing Grace," Clint stared down at the hymnal. He didn't know the words, but the sound filled something empty in him. After service, folks gathered under the oak tree for lemonade. Some whispered about the tattoos on his arms, but no one turned him away. Pastor Ellis clapped him on the shoulder. "You ever think maybe God kept you around to prove folks wrong?" Clint smiled faintly. More like he forgot to send the lightning. The pastor laughed. "Son, maybe you are the lightning." That night, Clint returned to the diner to finish a repair on the back steps. The sky glowed pink, and the smell of honeysuckle drifted through the air. Ruth Ann came out with 2 cups of lemonade. "You did good today," she said, handing him one. He chuckled. "Didn't burst into flames, so I'd call that a win." "You even bowed your head during the prayer," she teased. "Didn't want to be rude." "Mm-hmm," she smiled. "You prayed." He shrugged. "Maybe." They sat there on the steps again, sipping in silence. After a while, she said, "You ever think about what you'd do if you could start over?" He thought about it. "Yeah, I'd be a better man sooner." Her voice softened. "You're doing that now." He met her gaze. "You think it's that easy?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But it's possible." The crickets started up, their song rising through the night air. For a moment, Clint closed his eyes and listened, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he'd sat still long enough to hear them. He opened them again and found Ruth Ann watching him with quiet kindness. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man running from ghosts. He felt like a man who'd finally stopped long enough to let one go. Saturday came bright and forgiving. The diner gleamed with fresh paint, and the smell of grilled chicken and sweet tea drifted through the air. Ruth Ann hung a handmade banner that read, "Thank you, Magnolia," while Clint strung up thrift store lights across the awning. It wasn't perfect, but it felt alive, like hope made visible. By noon, people filled the lot. Kids chased each other with sticky hands, laughter echoing off the walls. Pastor Ellis arrived carrying cornbread. Lou LeMay commanded the serving line like a general, and even Sheriff Bradley showed up in plain clothes, pretending he wasn't nervous to be there. Clint worked the grill, the smoke curling around him like forgiveness made of hickory and flame. Inside, the jukebox played Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Ruth Ann poured lemonade, her blue dress bright as morning. When a little girl told her she looked like a fairy, she laughed, really laughed, and the sound rolled across the lot like music. Clint caught that laugh, held it quietly in his heart, and smiled. Pastor Ellis stood on a crate and gave a short speech about grace, how it comes where it's least expected. Then he gestured toward Ruth Ann. And now, a song. She froze, but Lou LeMay nudged her forward. Ruth Ann stepped inside the diner and pressed a button on the jukebox. The first notes of His Eye is on the Sparrow filled the air. Her voice started soft but grew strong, pure as sunlight after rain. The crowd hushed. Clint stood in the doorway, eyes closed, hands still. When the last note faded, there was silence, then applause, gentle and full. Ruth Ann laughed through tears, pressing a hand to her heart. She looked up and met Clint's gaze. No words, just understanding. Evening settled in with golden light. Families lingered, sharing stories and food. The hateful stain on the diner wall was gone, replaced with laughter and clinking plates. Clint sat beside Ruth Ann on the steps, both tired and happy. "You did good? Today," he said. "So did you," she answered. "Guess we make a decent team." He chuckled. "Guess we do." The lights overhead flickered on, wrapping them in a soft glow. For a long moment they didn't speak, just watched fireflies rise into the dusk. When the crowd left, Clint stood by his bike. Ruth Ann lingered at the door, smiling faintly. "See you in the morning," she said. "In the morning," he replied. She drove off, taillights fading down the quiet road. Clint stayed a while, listening to the crickets, the hum of peace, and the faint echo of her song that still seemed to hang in the air. Proof that even a scarred town could remember how to sing again. The night came quiet after the cookout, a slow calm over Magnolia. The diner lights glowed soft against the dark, and Clint stayed behind to finish cleaning the grill. He hummed to himself, a low tune that sounded almost like peace. For the first time in years, he felt steady, like a man building instead of breaking. Across town, thunder rumbled low. A storm was brewing, but he thought nothing of it. Ruth Ann had left an hour earlier, waving goodnight from her car window. He could still hear her voice in his head, warm, teasing, alive. Then came the sound that didn't belong. An engine, too rough, too loud. Headlights swung into the lot, cutting across the diner windows. 3 men stepped out, faces shadowed, leather vests flashing symbols Clint recognized from another life. His old gang. "Razor," one of them called, grinning through his beard. "Heard you went soft." Clint's gut turned cold. "Get back in your truck," he warned. "Ain't your business here." But they just laughed. "Oh, it's our business. We're taking what's owed. Heard this place has got a fat register and no security." He stepped forward, fists tight. "You ain't touching this diner." The first man lunged. Clint met him halfway, and the fight was fast, ugly. Metal crashed, a window shattered. Another man grabbed the cash drawer. Clint swung, knocking it from his hands. The third drew a gun, shouting curses. Ruth Ann's car turned the corner just then. She froze at the sight. Clint in the floodlight, glass and chaos around him. Her heart dropped. "Clint!" she screamed. He turned just as the gun fired. The shot missed, hitting the sign above the door. Clint charged, tackling the gunman, the weapon skidding across the ground. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called the cops. The gang scrambled, one jumping into the truck. The driver peeled off, leaving the stolen cash scattered in the rain. Clint stood over the last man, panting, soaked, his hands stained with grease and blood. Blue lights flashed. Sheriff Bradley's cruiser skidded into the lot. "Hands where I can see 'em," the sheriff barked. Clint raised them slowly. "They were robbing the place." Ruth Ann ran forward. "He's telling the truth." But the scene told a different story. Broken glass, a gun, Clint standing over an unconscious man. The sheriff hesitated, then pulled the cuffs from his belt. "Sorry, son. Gotta bring you in." Clint didn't fight. He just looked at Ruth Ann, hurt flickering in his eyes like dying fire. "Don't let him twist it," he said quietly. She nodded, tears cutting clean lines down her face. As they drove away, the diner lights flickered in the rain. The jukebox inside clicked once, then fell silent, as if it too couldn't bear to sing. Ruth Ann stood in the doorway, shaking, watching the red taillights fade into the dark. For the first time, her prayers came back as sobs. The next few days felt endless. Magnolia buzzed with whispers, half believing Clint was guilty, half saying he'd saved the diner. Ruth Ann couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The image of him in handcuffs played over and over in her mind. She visited the jail that Wednesday afternoon. The room smelled of old paper and cold coffee. Clint sat behind glass, tired but calm. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "I should have been sooner," she answered. "They think you did it." He shrugged, the faintest smile on his lips. "Wouldn't be the first time folks believed the worst." Ruth Ann pressed her hand to the glass. "Tell me you didn't." "I didn't," he said simply. "But it don't matter what I say. It matters what you believe." Her throat tightened. "I believe you." For the first time since his arrest, he smiled. Small, but real. "Then maybe that's enough." When she left, Pastor Ellis met her outside the courthouse. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Faith is hardest when it's lonely," he said, "but that's when it works best." That night, Ruth Ann went through the diner's security footage with Deputy Calvin Moore. The camera had caught just enough. The flash of the gang's truck, the moment Clint lunged to stop the gunman. Calvin leaned back, grinning. "Ma'am, this might clear him." Tears burned her eyes. "Then let's make it right." Outside, the first stars blinked through the clouds. Ruth Ann stood in the quiet parking lot, clutching her brother's old dog tags in one hand and Clint's Bible in the other. She whispered into the wind, "Please, Lord, let the truth be stronger than the past." The courthouse was packed the morning Clint's case was heard. The air buzzed with whispers, some folks there for gossip, others for justice. Ruth Ann sat in the front row, her hands clasped tight, the small cross on her necklace digging into her palm. When Clint entered, escorted by the deputy, the room went still. His wrists were free now, but the weight on his shoulders wasn't. He glanced at Ruth Ann, and that single look, full of quiet trust, gave her strength. The district attorney began, painting Clint as a violent ex-biker who couldn't change his ways. Ruth Ann's stomach twisted, but when it was her turn to speak, she stood tall. She told them about the vandalism, about the men Clint had tried to stop, about the song he fixed that made her believe in mercy again. Her voice trembled, but the truth carried steady. Deputy Calvin stepped forward next, holding the security footage. "This shows the suspect protecting the victim, not robbing her," he said. The screen flickered. Grainy images of the fight, the flash of the gang's truck, Clint pulling one of them away from the cash drawer. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge watched, then leaned forward. "Case dismissed," he said at last. "Mr. Maddox, you're free to go." Ruth Ann stood, tears blurring her sight. Clint turned toward her, disbelief and relief mixing in his face. Outside, sunlight hit them full on. Ruth Ann reached for him, and he caught her hand like it was the only real thing in the world. "Told you I'd smile again?" she whispered. He smiled back, voice rough. "Guess we both did." Weeks passed, and peace finally settled over Magnolia. The diner reopened with new paint and a new name, Ruth and Clint's Home of Second Chances. Fresh flowers stood on every table, and the jukebox played softly from morning till night. Clint worked in the garage by day and at the diner by evening, fixing leaky faucets and smiling more than he ever thought he could. Ruth Ann baked pies again, humming gospel tunes under her breath. People came from nearby towns to eat, to talk, to remember that Grace still lived here. Pastor Ellis blessed the sign, saying, "This is what forgiveness looks like when it wears work boots." That night, Clint and Ruth Ann locked the doors and stood hand in hand under the porch light. "Feels like home," she whispered. He smiled. "Because it is." A year later, the diner shone brighter than ever. The sign above the door, Home of Second Chances, glowed against the sunset as the townsfolk gathered for the anniversary celebration. Children ran across the lot, chasing bubbles, laughter spilling like music into the warm summer air. Inside, Clint flipped the open sign to welcome, smiling at Ruth Ann bustling between tables with a tray of peach cobbler. Her laughter rang clear and easy, the sound that had once been so rare. When the choir from Pastor Ellis's church began to sing, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," the crowd quieted. Ruth Ann joined in, her voice strong and steady, every note carrying gratitude instead of grief. Clint stood beside her, pride shining through his quiet smile. As the last chord faded, applause filled the diner. Ruth Ann turned to Clint, tears bright in her eyes. "I thought I'd lost my faith," she whispered. He took her hand gently. "You didn't lose it," he said. "It was just waiting to come home." Outside, the neon lights hummed, fireflies blinked, and laughter rose into the evening sky. Magnolia, once broken by hate, now sang with forgiveness. And so did they. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.